In the next episode, Choi takes Ryong to a park and the two sit inside his car. Ryong inquires if he wants to ask anything, but Choi remains silent. Later, he expresses that he just goes numb whenever he looks at her and asks her to sign the contract. Choi also mentions that Ryong looks like an 18th century girl who will fail to understand modern society and its beliefs. So, before Ryong gets tricked and signs a contract with some other company, he wants her to be contracted with his company. Despite the speech, Ryong refuses to sign the contract, prompting an angry Choi to walk out of the car. Ryong follows him and stands beside him at a riverside. The two don't speak for a while, but Choi eventually breaks the silence and asks Ryong what Hyo told her about him. She replies that Hyo said good things about his personality and behavior, and that Choi is very possessive about the things he likes. Hearing this, Choi also agrees and tells Ryong that he has already accepted her as his girl and wants her to sign the contract. But she again refuses and asks him if he started liking her, to which he says no. The next day, Choi can be seen at his office secretly watching Ryong practicing her dance moves. Later, while watching one of the latest interviews of Choi, Ryong learns that he is really very famous around the country and is loved by the majority of people. She tries to tell her dancing group that Choi has started liking her, but no one in the group believes her. Later at night, after the dance practice is over, Ryong is returning home with Minju and other people. Choi is looking at her through his window and gets angry when a boy puts his hand around her shoulder. After Ryong leaves, Choi tries to sleep, but cannot. He keeps on imagining that Ryong is at a nightclub being ill-treated by other boys. He murmurs during his sleep and keeps on hoping that Ryong is safe. On the other hand, Ryong reaches her apartment, checks her phone, and becomes sad when she doesn't find any messages from Choi. The following day, Choi visits the performance room to observe Ryong's group's practice session. But after the group starts performing, he walks out without seeing it. Confused, Ryong follows and grabs his hand to stop him. She then tells him that she was missing him and wanted to see him badly. Despite this, Choi rudely tells her that he is busy and leaves. After walking a little farther, he curses himself for behaving rudely with Ryong and blames his hand for touching her. All this is being watched by Hyo, and he believes that Choi is suffering from some kind of illness. Later, Hyo visits Choi in his room and asks what's wrong, and the latter finally reveals everything. Hearing this, Hyo decides to help, and the two start making a list of things that Choi must do to make Ryong sign the contract and accept his love. The meeting continues for such a long time that the music video containing Ryong is successfully shot and wrapped up. After the shoot is over, Ryong feels like meeting with Choi and she visits his cabin, carrying some food for him. However, Choi again acts cold and asks her if she has something to say. Enraged, Ryong just hands him the food and walks away. The next morning, following Hyo's plan, Choi visits Ryong's apartment, holding a bouquet for her. Ryong is surprised to see him and also accepts his request to go out for lunch. During their lunch, she tells Choi that she wants to return home as the music video she came for is now completed. Choi then asks her if she thought about the contract, but to his dismay, Ryong still refuses to sign it and only expresses her gratitude for whatever Choi did for her. Hearing this, Choi becomes angry and decides to drop Ryong at her house by himself. In the following scene, a devastated Choi returns home and Hyo can be seen consoling her. Hyo tells him that he did whatever he could for Ryong to make her happy and feel safe. He also mentions that by now she must have understood his feelings and will definitely call him within some days. At last, he asks Choi about the sudden reason for her departure. Unfortunately, Choi forgot to ask the reason, and he starts blaming himself for his carelessness. Days pass by, and Choi starts missing Ryong badly. He starts listening to sad love songs and pays little attention while making office decisions. He also notices Ryong everywhere and talks with a doll most of the time. Choi has started thinking about Ryong a lot, so he decides to go meet her. Hyo tries to stop him and tells him that she has no interest in him, but Choi forcefully pushes his assistant away and rushes towards Ryong's residence. After a bit of struggle, Choi arrives at Ryong's house but cannot find her around. The scene then flashes back to the past, where Ryong meets Hwang Ho and asks him to take care of her dog as she is going away for some days. After this, she attempts to make a call to Choi, but Hwang Ho stops her from doing so. He suggests that Ryong should not believe in city people as they are selfish and only think of their benefit. Ryong tries to defend Choi by saying that he is a good man, but Hwang Ho dismisses it right away, giving her an example of how CEO Young lied to him. Ryong refuses to believe him and asserts that she thinks Choi has started liking her. Hearing this, Hwang Ho tells her that Choi is doing all this to make her sign the contract. This finally convinces Ryong, and she switches off her mobile without calling Choi. Back in the present, Choi returns to his office and seems tense. On the other hand, Hyo has got some information about Ryong. So, he approaches his boss and tells him that Ryong might have gone to live with her aunt, who called her after her grandfather's death. He also mentions that it is good news for them, because now she will be safe. Next, Ryong can be seen working in her aunt's restaurant in Seoul. She helps her aunt prepare different dishes and serves the customers. The restaurant is near the hospital which Choi frequently visits for his treatment. Elsewhere, Choi is crying for Ryong, thinking that she has no idea about his love for her. The following day, while Choi's regular doctor, Young Yoon, is having lunch in Ryong's aunt's restaurant, he gets a call from his secretary informing him that Choi is at the hospital to see him. As soon as Yoon hears Choi's name, he gets annoyed and decides to take revenge on him, as Choi always tortures him. Luckily, Ryong hears the doctor talking Choi's name and tries to concentrate on the conversation. Later, Yoon arrives at the hospital and confronts Choi for annoying him. He yells at Choi, but to his surprise, the latter does not respond and starts crying. Seeing tears in his eyes, Yoon apologizes and asks him about what happened. However, Choi doesn't respond and simply walks out of the hospital, assuming that his love life has come to an end. At the same time, Ryong notices someone similar to Choi and follows him. Sadly, when she stops the man, he is someone else. But when she turns back, she spots Choi approaching her. The two look at each other for some time, and Choi becomes very happy to find her. In the next scene, Choi and Ryong are sitting in a park where Choi again asks her to sign the contract. This time, Ryong refuses by saying that she has promised her grandfather that she won't enter the acting world. She also tells him that her mother didn't die, but left her at an early age to pursue her career in modeling and never came back. So, her grandfather suggested she not fall for materialistic things in life and think about her own happiness. After hearing this, Choi finally understands Ryong's situation and tells her to keep doing the things that make her happy. He also promises to be by her side and asks her to call him if she needs anything. Following this, Choi returns home and talks to Hyo about his meeting with Ryong. Suddenly, he receives a call from her asking him to come over to her place as her aunt has gone away on a trip. Choi immediately gets ready and arrives outside Ryong's house, holding a bouquet for her. She receives him and serves him 9 different dishes for dinner. Choi seems surprised, but enjoys the dinner nonetheless. After dinner, Ryong serves him fruit and sits beside him. Here, Choi confesses his feelings for her and tells her that he just feels lively whenever he is around her. Unfortunately, at the same time, the telephone rings and Ryong goes to pick it up. When Choi learns that CEO Young is on the other side of the phone, he is surprised about how Young got her number and is calling her late at night. Seeing Choi staring at her, Ryong cuts the call short. An angry Choi then approaches her and asks her about what is going on between her and Young. She tries to explain that she has no relation with Young, but Choi does not listen and leaves the house. Shortly after, Choi arrives home and starts crying. Hyo comes to visit him, and after learning that he is angry with Young for calling Ryong at night, he reminds him of his insecurities when it comes to Young. On the other hand, Minju calls Ryong and invites her to hang out. Later, the two enter a club where other staff from Choi's office are also present. Surprisingly, Choi is also in the club keeping an eye on Ryong. When he notices that the girls are drinking and Ryong is not comfortable with it, he approaches them and suggests they not drink. While returning back, he runs his hand on Minju's hair, like he did before with Ryong. Choi also dances with another girl in the club. He is doing this to make Ryong jealous as suggested by Hyo. The plan works, and Choi feels heartbroken. The following day, CEO Young meets with Ryong and asks her to sign a contract with his company. However, she refuses straight away and returns home. At home, she feels sick and keeps on thinking about why Choi is ignoring her. In the next scene, Choi receives a call from Ryong informing him that she is sick and is at the hospital. At first, he yells at her for informing him late and then rushes to the hospital. There, Ryong thanks Choi for visiting her and the two start chatting. After a while, Choi transfers her to a separate room so that she can rest and be away from the noise. The next day, when Choi reaches his office, Hyo shouts at him for not attending an important meeting. Choi tries to explain that Ryong is sick and that he had to look after her in the hospital. But Hyo is having none of it. He claims that Ryong has changed Choi's behavior and he has started behaving rudely towards him. Meanwhile, Ryong finds out through her aunt that Choi paid all her medical bills. Later, Choi returns to the hospital and goes straight to Ryong's room. He doesn't find her inside and asks the nurse about her, who tells him that Ryong is in the garden. Wasting no time, Choi reaches the garden and notices a doctor flirting with Ryong. He then approaches them and puts his hand around Ryong's shoulder, pulling her closer. The doctor assumes that he's her brother, but Choi makes it clear that he is not related to her and that their relationship can be changed to any terms. He also threatens the junior doctor to give him information about the doctor in charge so that he can complain about his behavior with patients. In the following scene, the two are still in the garden, and Choi warns Ryong to stay away from unknown boys. However, she replies that all boys are not the same and do not have the same purpose. After this, Choi asks her about her health, and she tells him that her fever has gone down and she is totally fine. Before leaving, Choi comes closer to Ryong and kisses her. As expected, this makes her uncomfortable and she slaps him hard. However, Choi simply mentions that it's his feelings for her and walks away. The next morning, Hyo is laughing at Choi for failing to woo Ryong after putting in so much effort. On the other hand, Ryong gets discharged from the hospital and gets a call from Minju, who asks her to meet ASAP. Later, Ryong can be seen with Minju at a cafe, where the latter cries about her boyfriend betraying her. She also tells Ryong that her boyfriend is leaving her as they are totally different and can never be comfortable with each other. At the same time, Choi arrives there and pulls Minju into his car as she had run away from an ongoing video shoot. Ryong follows them to the car and Choi asks about her health. Ryong replies that she is all right, but Choi still tells her to take rest before driving away. Later that day, while Ryong is working with her aunt at her restaurant, Minju messages her and informs her about Choi leaving for China for a long vacation. Worried, Ryong immediately calls Choi, but he does not pick up. She then starts running towards his office to meet him before he leaves. On her way, it starts raining and Ryong collides with a man, causing her cell to slip out of her hand and land on the road. When she goes to pick it up, a car nearly hits her, but Choi arrives in the nick of time and saves her life. After the incident, Ryong hugs Choi tightly and confesses her feelings for him. She tells him that she has no idea when she started liking him and falling for him. To save Ryong from the rain, Choi takes her inside his car and kisses her. The two spend some quality time together, with Hyo guarding the car outside. Ryong asks Choi if he will go to China, and he replies yes. He reveals that he is simply going for 3 days and will return immediately after that. Hearing this, Ryong realizes that Minju lied to her to bring them closer. In the next scene, CEO Young notices Choi and Ryong together and decides to break them apart. He publishes an article about the two as a scandal. To divert the audience attention from Ryong and Choi's relationship, Hyo publishes another article mentioning that Choi is in a gay relationship with his assistant, Hyo. At first, Choi seems very angry about the article, but when he learns how he and Ryong can walk freely, he accepts it. The movie ends with Choi and Ryong happily walking around a park and talking about their future.